They're making millions off your kid. How corporations profit from juvenile detention. Your son walked into that courtroom with a lawyer who met him 5 minutes before the hearing. The judge took about 4 minutes to review the case, and in less time than it takes to microwave a meal, your child was sentenced to a juvenile facility 2 hours away from home. You didn't understand what just happened, but there was somebody in that room who did. Somebody who knew exactly what just happened, and they were very, very happy about it. Because today, they just made money off your kid. Every single day your child sits in that facility, somebody is cashing a check. Not because your child is being helped, not because your child is being rehabilitated, but because your child is filling a bed, and that bed has a price tag. This is the business of juvenile detention, and today we're pulling back the curtain because the system is counting on you never finding out how deep this goes. Section: the business of locking up children. Let me ask you something. You know Wall Street, right? Stocks, investments, rich people making money. What if I told you there are corporations, publicly traded companies whose stock prices go up every time a teenager gets locked up? That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a fact. 2 companies dominate the private juvenile detention business in America: Geo Group, Core Civic, formerly known as Corrections Corporation of America. These are not small operations. Geo Group alone pulled in over $2.3 billion in a single year. They have shareholders, they have board members, they have investors watching quarterly earnings, and those investors need one thing to keep making money: occupied beds. That's it. Not success stories, not kids who got their lives together, not families that were reunited and healed. Just occupied beds. Think about what that means. The financial health of that company is tied directly to how many teenagers are locked up at any given time. More kids locked up equals more revenue. Fewer kids locked up equals the stock drops. So tell me, do you really think these companies are rooting for your child to come home? Section: how the contracts work. Here's where it gets real ugly. When a state government decides to use a private juvenile facility, they sign a contract. That contract sets a price for each child each day. It's called a per diem rate. We're talking anywhere from $200 to $500 per bed per day. Your child worth $500 a day to a corporation, not to get therapy, not to get their GED, not to come home better than they left, just to be there. But here's the part that should make every family in this country furious. Some of these contracts have what's called a bed guarantee. A bed guarantee means the state has to pay for a certain number of beds whether they're filled or not. So if the state is paying for 200 beds and only 150 kids are locked up, the state still pays for 200. Now sit with that for a second. What does that create? It creates pressure, political pressure, system pressure to keep those beds filled. Because if those beds sit empty, somebody is losing money. And when money is on the line, people find ways to make sure they don't lose it.
The Justice Policy Institute documented exactly how this works. Private prison companies spend millions of dollars in lobbying every year. Millions! Not on education, not on mental health resources, not on the communities these kids come from. On lobbyists who walk into state capitals and push for policies that keep more kids locked up longer. Tougher sentencing guidelines, more referrals to residential programs, less investment in alternatives. Every policy that puts more kids in those facilities is money in their pocket. Let that sink in. Now, let me talk about what your child actually experiences inside these facilities, because the companies sell it as treatment, rehabilitation, a fresh start. That is the pitch. That is not always the reality. The ACLU has documented conditions inside privately operated juvenile facilities across the country. Physical abuse by staff, not investigated, not reported, covered up. Mental health care so inadequate that kids in crisis are put in isolation instead of getting help. Isolation rooms, solitary confinement for teenagers. We know from research that solitary confinement causes lasting psychological damage in adults. Imagine what it does to a 15-year-old. educational programs that don't meet basic standards, so kids fall further behind in school while they're supposed to be getting back on track. And through all of it, your family is 2 hours away because these facilities are rarely built in the communities they serve. They're built where land is cheap, which means your family, if you can even afford the gas, is driving 2 hours each way to see your child for 1 hour on a Saturday. And when you want to talk to your child during the week, some facilities charge families up to $14 a minute for phone calls. $14 a minute! So the company is getting paid by the government to hold your child, and they're getting paid by your family to let you talk to your child. They are extracting money from both ends, from taxpayers and from the very families the system already broke. Let me tell you about the revolving door. The revolving door is when somebody works in government, regulating an industry, and then goes to work for that same industry, or the other way around. Private prison industry executives who move into government positions, government officials who leave and become lobbyists for private detention companies, going back and forth, writing the very policies that determine how many kids get locked up and how much money the companies make from it. The Annie E. Casey Foundation and the Sentencing Project have both documented the connection between private prison lobbying and youth sentencing policy. This is not hidden, it is public record. What is hidden is how much your community is paying for it, because every dollar that goes to a private detention company is a dollar that didn't go to a school, didn't go to a mental health clinic in your neighborhood, didn't go to a youth program that might have kept your child out of that courtroom in the first place. They defund the things that protect your kids, and then they profit when your kids end up in the system because of what got defunded. That is the machine. Now, let me talk about what your child actually experiences inside these facilities, because the companies sell it as treatment, rehabilitation, a fresh start. That is the pitch. That is not always the reality. You need to understand what this does to a family, because people don't talk about this part. Your child is 2 hours away. You're working. You might be working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. You can't make every visit. Your child notices, not because you abandoned them, because you're surviving. But in that facility, with no familiar faces, no community, no sense of home, your child starts to change. Not for the better. The research on private juvenile facilities is consistent. Kids who go through privately operated detention programs show higher rates of rearrest after release than kids who go through community-based programs. Higher, not lower. So not only is the company taking your tax dollars and your family's money, they are sending kids back out worse than when they went in. And then those kids end up back in the system, which fills more beds, which makes more money. This is not an accident. A system that actually rehabilitated teenagers would put these companies out of business. So the system doesn't actually rehabilitate teenagers. You have to understand that. The goal is not your child's future. The goal is a filled bed and a cashed check. Now, I'm not gonna leave you in that dark place without telling you what we can actually do about it, because communities are already fighting and they are winning. Number 1, know before they go. If your child is facing any kind of juvenile detention or residential program, ask specifically whether it is privately operated. Ask who owns the facility. Ask what the state contract says. You have a right to that information. A juvenile defense attorney, not a public defender who has 5 minutes before the hearing, a real juvenile defense attorney can help you find alternatives to detention. Community-based programs, diversion programs, treatment options. These exist. They are often more effective and they do not profit from your child's incarceration. Number 2, support organizations that are fighting this at the policy level. The Juvenile Law Center, the National Juvenile Justice Network, the Equal Justice Initiative. These organizations are in state capitals, in courtrooms, in legislatures, fighting the private prison lobby every single day. When you share their work, when you donate, when you show up at community meetings, you are weakening the machine. Number 3, talk about it.
The power of this industry is silence. They count on families being too overwhelmed, too exhausted, too scared to speak up. Every time a family shares their story, another family learns they are not alone. Every time this video gets shared, another parent finds out what's really happening before it happens to their child. That is how we break this. Not with a single lawsuit, not with a single policy change, with an entire community that refuses to stay quiet. Closing. At JJ Decoded, this is what we do. We give you the information the system spends millions of dollars making sure you never have. They hired lobbyists, they made political donations, they built facilities out of your reach, all so you wouldn't know. Now you know. Share this video right now. Not tomorrow, right now. Put it in your group chat, text it to every parent you know. Because somewhere tonight, there is a family sitting in a courtroom about to make a decision without knowing any of what you just learned. Don't let that be someone you know. They built this system counting on our silence. We end that today. Subscribe to JJ Decoded. New videos every week. Drop your questions in the comments. What do you want us to decode next?